I'm sure most of you have heard of that little science fact about how there is less antimatter in the universe compared to normal matter. This imbalance is what allows our reality to exist, and we don't really know why it works this way. Maybe it's just pure random chance, or maybe there is a guiding hand orchestrating things so that life may proliferate. Truth is, we just don't know. In Star Rail, however, there is an entity that actively ensures the universe is in a state of balance. No singular force can be allowed to overtake another, otherwise, the universe may not function the way it's meant to. For all to exist, there must be balance, and this is the supposed creed of the aeon of equilibrium. But is this really their main purpose, or is there something more to this aeon, the path, and its followers? That's what we'll be discussing in this video. Before we unpack the equilibrium, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Fair warning, this video is going to be longer than usual, as when I was drafting out the script for this, I found the concept of equilibrium and HooH specifically incredibly fascinating. While it may appear straightforward, there are many layers to this concept that I felt compelled to share them all, so we'll explore nearly every aspect of this path from its followers to its overall concept. So sit back, put your feet up, and let's start discussing the god of equilibrium. The path of equilibrium is one of the lesser spoken paths in Star Rail. On its surface, the path can be perceived as just being about keeping everything equal and balanced. However, when we read through the databank description of both equilibrium and its aeon HooH, there is an implication that HooH is critically interwoven with the rest of the universe. I'm going to read that databank description of equilibrium and give you my interpretation of its exposition line by line. The first paragraph mentions that the chain of karma that mortals obsess over is nothing but a rough approximation of the complicated topology behind all things. HooH dissolve their will into the web of logic behind the universe's movement, maintaining the balance and stability of all things in perpetuity. What I think this is trying to express is that our mortal view of the universe is but one piece of a much larger and more complicated system. One that HooH has at some level merged with or is at least aware of. Our sense of morality is based upon causality or karma, in that an action always leads to consequences or cause and effect. While equilibrium might make you think of balance or Thanos, and that does seem to be in line with the concept of actions leading to consequences, this text implies that it's far more complicated and might be tied to fate rather than karma. It's almost as if HooH is saying that your actions will have consequences, but not because of some automated function of reality, but rather because it has been foreseen and pre-planned. This is evident in the second paragraph, which states that adventurous mortals tirelessly seek out flaws in this system, believing their intellect to be superior to that of the aeon. However, little could they imagine that they have already been reduced to strings inside a surveillance system, unable to escape the meticulous network woven by HooH. This paragraph further expands on the idea spoken about earlier. Among the mortals who are part of the system, there are always those who try to work around it. For example, there are individuals trying to turn themselves into aeons like Ruan Mei, or those who seemingly go against their predefined fate like Acheron. There are even those who are outright changing the bigger picture, like the main character. The text suggests, however, that regardless of what these individuals do, they fail to realize that all of this has already been accounted for, and that their attempts at changing fate have already been foreseen and cancelled out. It hints that fate would always play out as it's supposed to, due to the hard work and meticulously planned network woven by HooH. Think of it like fate being a predefined story, and individuals within that story are trying to change it to suit their personal goals, but HooH is kind of like the final editor or director, ensuring everyone sticks to their scripts. That's what the databank, at least to me, is trying to show, and this hints at the true nature of equilibrium. While we might think that equilibrium is about maintaining balance, there is this possibility based on what we've just discussed that equilibrium is more about maintaining the status quo. It isn't about fairness, equality, or balance, but it's more related to ensuring the universe works in the way it's designed, and that the story unfolds as it's meant to. HooH could just turn out to be a monitoring system, meant to surveil how the universe and its inhabitants are behaving, and if they move away from their predestined plan or path, then equilibrium would step in to correct their course. HooH might just be the universal concept of Big Brother. surveilling existence and ensuring everyone follows the rules or fate under the guise of equilibrium so that the story proceeds in the way it's supposed to. I kind of imagine it like this. Think of existence, fate, or the main story, whatever you want to call it, as a person walking on a tightrope. They move from one end to another by balancing themselves and keeping themselves centered. Equilibrium is the long pole they use to remain at the center of the tightrope. This is why the description mentioned things like a surveillance system and a meticulous network you can't escape from. In this analogy, humanity is the wind, constantly trying to push the tightrope walker over the edge. The wind, or humanity, doesn't know what it's doing, but if allowed to do what it wants, then it might cause the end of the tightrope walker, or in this case, the end of existence. And that's where equilibrium steps in. It's not trying to balance out the universe like Thanos is, but rather ensuring enough balance exists so that the story or fate can stay its course. This is why the databank description does not mention much about balance in terms of equality, but talks more about fate and surveillance. This could mean that equilibrium could very well just be about control. The description in the databank certainly alludes to the idea that instead of just righting wrongs, HooH is very much in tune with the laws of the universe, giving it insight into how the story should progress. Now, as compelling as this idea is, and the first interpretation I'll bring up, we still need to explore the possibility that equilibrium is really just about balance. I'm sure that on some level, equilibrium takes inspiration from many concepts of duality that exists in the real world, such as good versus evil, or perhaps something more philosophical like the yin and yang. However, as I was yapping on about the earlier idea, I didn't realize that I haven't even spoken about the aeon themselves. So before I expand on the second interpretation of equilibrium, let's talk about the aeon first, as their appearance and description lends quite a bit to the next conversation. HooH appears as an almost symmetrical mirror of itself, with two halves appearing merged, and at its center, two orbiting black holes circle one another in tandem. For some reason, the first thing I saw was HooH had a 69 emblem on their chest, but I'm sure the black hole interpretation is a more suitable representation of equilibrium rather than a random 69. In the simulated universe development log, HooH was said to be one of the most ancient of all the aeons, hinting that the concept they rule over is one that is primordial or primeval to existence itself. The aeon of equilibrium was said to have been at one point a singular entity, but later split off into two, though it's not clearly stated why this happened. I personally believe that as the universe aged from the moment of its conception to present day, the world and reality became increasingly more complicated. Humanity might have started off with simpler needs and logic, but as they progressed, concepts that were once black and white started to blur together. As a reflection of this, HooH likely evolved as well. HooH also somewhat alludes to this, stating that HooH had once separated concepts itself, fusing all positives and negatives in the universe into an equilibrial whole. This might mean that while things were easily separated in the beginning, with how complicated existence and reality got, a combined and homogeneous system needed to be created. With the evolution of that concept, HooH changed to reflect it as well. This separation of concepts and the mirrored appearance of the aeon of equilibrium is why I also think they might be inspired by the concepts of duality, specifically the yin and yang. The yin and yang symbol encapsulates a worldview where dualities are not seen as conflicts, but as complementary parts of a whole. It's like everything is a combination of a little bad in good and a little good in bad. This further lends to what HooH mentioned, where HooH separated concepts but later on merged them. This philosophy encourages the pursuit of balance in all things, and the understanding that change and transformation are natural parts of existence. While the yin and yang can represent interdependence, balance, and complementarity, one other key philosophical concept is also the cyclical nature of existence. The interaction between yin and yang is cyclical, as it also represents the changing and repetition of life itself. So even if we view equilibrium from the philosophy of yin and yang, the concepts of a cyclical fate makes its appearance once more. This heavily hints at the nature of Star Rail's universe and the function of equilibrium within that cycle. Equilibrium might embody the cyclical and dual nature of existence, but at the same time functions as a system to ensure the universe follows the rules they were set or built in. Because of this, I then started wondering, where exactly would this path sit among the scale of good guys and bad guys? Can they be grouped with more benevolent aeons such as Qlipoth or Xipe, or are they more destructive like Nanook or Ouroboros? Now, I know that none of the aeons are inherently good or evil, but what I'm trying to figure out here is how perverse HooH's interpretation of balance and equilibrium is. Are they just trying to ensure everything remains status quo, or is it something else more sinister? Does equilibrium mean what we think it means, or does it have a different, more twisted meaning within the context of Star Rail? I mean, we've seen this countless times with other aeons and paths. The will to live longer can turn into an overpopulated mess like with the abundance, and fun and laughter can become rapidly dangerous like with elation. So how far will HooH go to achieve the equilibrium that they are programmed to pursue? In the devlog, Herta asserts that with the disappearance of Enna the Order, equilibrium's duty have only grown greater. This implies that with Enna being forcibly absorbed, it was up to HooH to ensure order was maintained, at least so that chaos doesn't completely take over, to balance things out. Herta then asks, how would HooH perceive Nanook, seemingly questioning whether HooH would dislike Nanook after attempting to balance out order. Of course, Herta was just asking this question out into the air due to intellectual curiosity, but I think that her line of questioning is what can give us an inkling into how HooH truly functions. While the disappearance of Enna does compel HooH to ensure order is maintained, I think that if the situation was the other way around, HooH would still act accordingly. If, say, for example, Nanook was the one to disappear, I would argue that to ensure equilibrium is maintained, HooH would easily take on the role of a destroyer. This is why something like equilibrium can very quickly swing to either the side of good or bad. Again, what I'm saying here is perceived good or evil and not morality based. If the Aeon of Equilibrium goes around destroying planets to balance out the universe, I'm sure you would expect the inhabitants of those planets to consider them as the bad guys. So is the path good or evil? Like most paths and Aeons, it's neither, but as I mentioned, a being that is obsessed with controlling everything may be good one moment and completely destructive the next. Up till this point, our discussions have mostly revolved around the Aeon and its path, and admittedly, we don't really know much about either of these topics in detail. Equilibrium hasn't had its own story yet, and so much of these interpretations are based on its behavior alone. However, like most paths, we can get a bit more insight by observing how their followers behave. More often than not, these followers tend to not be 100% true to the Aeon or its path, mixing their own thoughts and interpretations with the true will of the path, but we can still get an idea from them. While most paths have two factions that follow them, Equilibrium only has one, the Arbitrators. In their description, the Arbitrators are said to act according to the commands of their Aeon. Now, this might make you think that they are in some way interpreting the actions of the Aeon as instructions or maybe even misunderstanding them. Most factions are guilty of this. However, I think that HooH may actually be in direct communication with them, and there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is that the Aeon of Equilibrium is likely very hands-on with how to enact balance in the universe. We can see this in the databank description as it mentions the Aeon pulling on the many strings that are part of its planned network. It wouldn't be too crazy to think that this might include their own followers. This might also explain why there is really only one faction, as HooH doesn't really need more than that. In addition, the Arbitrators have a unique trait or description unseen in other factions in that wherever they go, they are often mistaken as gods. Given Emanators are directly blessed by their respective Aeons, if the Arbitrators work directly with HooH, the Aeon might be more open to giving them more power. This might result in a higher number of Emanator level individuals in the faction, and why most would consider them as godlike. I mean, the Emanators we have seen so far, namely Acheron, has indeed been powerful enough to overpower practically everyone on Penacony without even really trying. That said, there are things mentioned that refute a direct relationship between Aeon and faction. The Arbitrators have been described to not fully grasp the magnitude of their Aeon's machinations. So there is the possibility that they aren't directly receiving orders from HooH themselves, but like many other factions, just interpreting their actions. Their description in the databank sort of mentions this, as the Arbitrators are unable to view the complexities of existence as nothing more than radical extremes. But that still doesn't preclude them from directly dealing with HooH either. They might not understand the full story, but still capable enough to deliver. Another rather interesting way we can view their strength is perhaps due to the ideology of Equilibrium itself. Perhaps their strength is not a gift from HooH, but is related to how the path itself functions. Maybe the more strong people exist in the universe, the weaker they get as a whole, while the weaker humanity is, the stronger arbitrators get. Equilibrium. The truth is, since we know little about the path itself, both these ideas can be true. Either the arbitrators are a control mechanism wielded by HooH in exacting its idea of balance, or they are a representation of the duality and balance of existence. Both these ideas reflect both scenarios of HooH and the equilibrium I shared earlier. So what do I think equilibrium is really about? I've talked long enough about this to at least come to some conclusion, right? Personally, based on what I've shared, I don't think equilibrium is just about balance. It's about control and ensuring everyone sticks to the script. I view HooH as sort of the backup writer of the Star Rail main story. Whenever the story veers off too much in the wrong direction, HooH and the equilibrium will come in to rebalance the scales, as it were, so that fate gets back on track. In fact, in the arbitrator description provided in the databank, it even makes mentions of course corrections happening in the next patch. I've spoken about a looping universe many times in the past, and equilibrium might just be yet another function or system that enables that. If the protagonists have big PP isekai main character energy and wins a little too much, HooH enables and empowers the antagonist. But if the antagonists get too much of an advantage, then they tip the balance the other way. It's very much like they are course correcting the story as it moves from beginning to end, and this is the balance or equilibrium they wish to maintain, and not any notion of true utopia or equality. Personally, I feel this is the most compelling idea, but there is some value to the duality idea as well. Much like HooH themselves, I'm kinda split between the two ideas, so I'll let you decide which you feel makes more sense. If you think about it, as beautiful and serene as balance sounds, true utilitarian balance isn't all that great. In the grand scheme of things, we exist because things aren't balanced. There is more matter than antimatter, and of those matter, more visible matter than dark matter. Imbalances in morality is also what allows good to triumph over evil. A universe predicated on true equilibrium, where everything is equal, might sound nice on paper, but might be a nightmare in practice. Maybe a zero-sum game isn't something existence should be governed by. Given most paths are fueled by humanity's thoughts and emotions to some degree, it's likely equilibrium is a manifestation of some human-level desire or anxiety. Maybe in such a chaotic universe, humanity wants a being hidden in the shadows, pulling the strings, and ensuring everything goes according to plan so that they don't have to worry about things. A god to ensure that everything is equal, but is a perfect example of why you should be careful what you wish for, because that god might just create a world chaotic enough that you might be ready to sacrifice freedom for security. There are a ton of other ideas that I want to share here, but it might just make this video excessively long, so for now I'll just stop here. I've put off covering equilibrium for quite a while because this concept might appear straightforward, but to me, it can be interpreted in many different ways. So I just wanted some time to collect my thoughts. I hope that what I've shared here is interesting enough to be compelling. Which of these ideas sound like the most likely scenario, or do you have your own interpretation of equilibrium? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you've stuck around all the way to the end, I hope you had an entertaining time, and if you did, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.